my name is LJ and I'm back again for another vlog. Today I'm going to be doing a review on a book I've recently finished called The Shadow in the Glass by JJA Harwood. The main character is a 17-year-old girl called Eleanor, or Ella. Ella lives in Granborough House as a domestic servant. The reader learns that once she was a ward of the family, the Pembrokes, and grew up playing with their son Charles. Following the death of Mrs. Pembroke, Ella is the daughter of her beloved maidservant. Ella was forced into service whilst Charles goes off to finish his education and do his European tour, or some other form of travelling. Ella's best friend Leah, another maid, has been raped by the master of the house, the lecherous Mr. Pembroke, and has fallen pregnant. 5 months gone, she is thrown out by the stern Mrs. Danvers type character, Mrs. Fielding, the housekeeper, without pay or references. This begins a slippery slope of events for Eleanor. Eleanor escapes her reality in the refuge of books and goes for late-night escapades to the library, as she begins to dread becoming the new object of Mr. Pembroke's advances, or worse, that he turns his attentions to the 15-year-old maidservant, Aoife. One day she picks up a copy of Dr. Faustus, and a mysterious black-eyed woman appears, the fairy godmother type character. She states that she will grant her 7 wishes in exchange for her soul at the end of the last wish, a bargain that Ella readily accepts. This novel is portrayed as a gothic retelling of Cinderella, and I felt that this was the case in only the loosest of terms. Eleanor was a fairly unlikable protagonist, a very morally grey character, and she appears to be motivated by love and compassion, and it seems to be kind and intelligent. However, by a quarter way through, I would strongly say that this became very clear this story was her villain origin story. How I felt about it was that it was very well written. It was a well-detailed Victorian London setting. It was well done in the sense that it covered the gritty, dirty, nasty aspects of Victorian England, but also had the Charles Dickens-esque type, rough round the edges, rich society, looking down on the poor, looking at morals and values and how society functions as a whole. And I felt that in parts that this was well done. However, it did become in parts very detail orientated and it did plod, and I felt that this dragged down the pacing of the story in total. I would say coming towards the end, it did feel like it was dragging rather than ramping up the pacing and the suspense, which in a normal Gothic story you would be having something really like dramatic happening and you'd be on tenterhooks wanting to know what happened, and the detail removed some of the elements of suspense and it removed any form of cliffhangers or what ifs or oh no or anything that made you want to turn the page. Basically, it's a dark story, and I think this is where it's deemed to be gothic, is that it covers some very heavy topics, especially around murder, mental illness, sexual abuse, adoptive sibling romances, and sinister Mrs. Danvers type Mrs. Fielding, who came across as the sinister villain of the household, the accomplice of the Mr. Pembroke, master of the house character. I really liked the premise of this story, and it was one of the reasons why I picked it up, because it just caught my attention, and the idea of Cinderella being based over someone selling their soul for wishes was just fantastic, and it had a lot of promise. Was it well executed? probably not. Ella is constantly trying to reassure the reader and herself what a good person she is, and how her motives are pure and born out of love for her friends. But she reminds us so continuously of how she's at the mercy of her awful circumstances, including a bullying maid, her employer, also guardian, Mr. Pembroke, which leaves her unable to find somewhere else to go, and she will be without money and references. Now, the theme of her being without money and references is repeated continuously. It's like beating yourself over the head with a block. She constantly goes on about how she's trapped, she's cornered, and she can't escape. If she's without references, she'll end up destitute and nowhere to go. For someone who's presented with 7 wishes to escape these circumstances, this trope and this storyline became quite grating. Her character downfall was highlighted by the following things: that she killed a bird in exchange for pretty shoes. She manipulated the poor Charles, the Mrs. Clary, and Aoife, the maidservant I mentioned before. She blackmailed Mr. Pembroke. She was full of deceit. This all fed into thinly veiled references to her having a mental illness or being disturbed. If what this was displaying was the decline of her soul being destroyed by making wishes, it might have been clever. But as I will explain, it didn't actually get justified. As a result of the story and Ella's motivations and how the story plays out, she becomes a very mercenary character towards the end, motivated by money and her own self-interests. She states these are for her friends' own interests, but it's hard to believe at this point that that's the case. If, for whatever reason, there was a mystical character in your life that said, I will give you 7 wishes in exchange for your soul, and you realise early on that there are severe consequences to these wishes, would you still be using these wishes in a way that would help you escape your circumstances, or would you become embroiled in a plot full of scheming, selfishness and excuses? I found the triviality of her wishes very frustrating, and the fact that she wished for such pathetic things all along made me feel that the black-eyed woman was a figment of her imagination, and that actually Ella was the murderer all along. And this is something that I noted down in my story graph constantly when I was reading it. Every time I updated how many pages I'd read that day, I would write, this is a villain story, this is her villain arc, there is no way in hell this girl is not the murderer, because who would be wishing for some shoes when they could escape all of the circumstances that they keep banging on about how trapped they are and how at the mercy of their employer they are, when you have anything at your disposal and the first thing you choose is to wish for some shoes. The ending is very ambiguous, and this is one of the things that I found particularly annoying about this book. You never really find out, was it even magic? Was it all in her head? What was the point of the magical element? Why were there wishes? If she is the murderer, if this is her having a mental illness and her being disturbed and a frighteningly mad character, why would you not explain that the black-eyed woman was all in her head all along? It was so annoying. It needed a clarification there. Otherwise, the whole point of the story was pointless. There was no point, and I felt like throwing the book out the window. She's described constantly as being a feral child who attacked Mrs. Fielding and left her with a horrible scar on her neck. This was never addressed, this was never explained, we never were able to discover whether she actually did carry out this attack or whether it was a lie that was given by Lizzie. She manipulated Charles to the point where the poor man was battered and bruised. He'd ruined his life. But every time he offered to marry her, every time she was given an escape, she didn't take it because she wanted the beautiful white wedding. But at what cost? She had everything on the plate that she supposedly wanted, but she didn't want it in the end. And if what she wanted was to escape circumstances, why did it matter if she was poor at the end? She would have been married to a man that clearly adored her, even though she was a nasty piece of work. I found that element of the story, the romance, completely implausible because it wasn't a romance. She was using him for status, for power, for manipulative purposes. Was she even interested in him? Why did she shag him? I don't know. I felt really angry when she was unjustifiably angry about being removed to the house, to her wonderful little house in Peckham. What was that all about? You bargained for this situation with Mr. Pembroke and you gave yourself a fucking miscarriage in order to get it. And I don't know, but that made me ridiculously angry. It just made her out to be a very ugly person. Miscarriages is not something to be considered lightly. And the fact that she used it as a way to gain something for nothing, but then be angry about it. She wasn't even sad about losing the baby. She had no concept about the loss that she'd caused or any concern for the life. And it wasn't to get herself out of a circumstance because Charles was offering to fucking marry her and elope with her to fucking Gretna Green in the first place. She would have been okay. But she chose to miscarry the baby to have a house. And then he's like, oh, I made a deal with my father so you'd be okay because you lost the baby and I'm so sorry and blah, blah, blah. And then she's like, oh yeah, I did that myself. And what was the point of any of it? I mean, her primary focus about having the miscarriage was that she wanted to go travelling. I mean, for fuck's sake, the man was offering to take you wherever. He would have taken you fucking travelling with the baby. I'm sure he would have bent over backwards to let you have what you wanted. The other thing that really annoyed me, and I've mentioned a couple of times, was the triviality of mental illness. I know that Gothic stories make out that, there's a mad character in the attic and it makes it all scary and terrifying. But it wasn't well done. You either go down the route of mental illness properly and you need to do it well, or you don't. You don't just go down is she mad? Was there a dark-eyed woman that took her soul? What was the ending about? Where did she disappear to? No, it's lazy. It's lazy writing. You have to choose one or the other. You either make magic real or you make it a figment of her imagination. It doesn't work to leave the reader guessing. It's lazy. It makes out that mental illness is a joke, particularly someone who has violent and psychotic tendencies. You shouldn't link the two together. Make up your damn mind, bloody JJA Harwood. What I wanted to say is that my resounding thoughts of the book in whole was that it was a 2-star. 2 stars because it was well written in terms of technicality, but no way could I give it anything more because it sucks. There are so many good retellings of Cinderella out there. I recently read one in August called Stepsister by Jennifer Donnelly, and it was fantastic. I rated that one 5 stars. It was genuinely one of the highlights of August for me, and I highly recommend it. My last note on this book when I was reading it was, I'm really not enjoying this. I feel physically uncomfortable about where this conclusion is heading to, and that pretty much sums it up for me. So what I was really interested in is there anyone that's read any Cinderella retellings that they think are good? What would you recommend? What would you consider to avoid? I probably would recommend that you avoid this one, but I mean, if you like Gothic retellings and it sounds good to you and the blurb caught your imagination, please give it a go. Tell me your thoughts. If you've already read it, please see if we agree or if I'm just barking up the wrong tree, but it was definitely one of those stories I wanted to throw out the window. I've never been crosser at a main character for a long time. In fact, this is the crossest I've been for a while, so that kind of was the lasting impression I had. let me know. I look forward to making another video soon. Thank you. Bye.